It is Wednesday, my dudes, and that brings us all the way back to Velocity Lake episode 10. Can you believe it's been 10 weeks since I started this sorted series? I can't believe it. But here we are nonetheless. And here you can see me showing off the thing we built last week, which was the Street Fox coffee shop, and also the ride behind it, which you can see there, that airplane ride. Anyway, in keeping with last week's theme, we're going to be building another place where one can purchase beverages and food. From a shop, we're going to be building a cafe by the lakeside because I've pretty much finished all of the key parts of the main island. There's a few sort of T's to cross and I's to dot here and there, but for the most part, the main island is done in terms of its layout. So now we can start to plan about what we're going to do for the mainland over the bridges, which is the biggest space of land in the park, or at least, land that's a solid landmass. So it's going to be the place where all the big roller coasters are going to sit. So the first thing I did was I decided to build from this side and just work on small patches. One thing I've done in the past is basically plot out the layout of the entire park, which always ends up leading to kind of like a park I'm not satisfied with, because it's all just a series of big interconnecting paths with no sort of fluidity or plazas or anything. So I'm just building it all out one little patch at a time. Yes, I've put the whole path round this shoreline, but that's only really there to serve as a placeholder, just to give me an idea about where the pathway eventually needs to meander. So we're going to start off with this plaza here. So I've got the main plaza with obviously the stone paving, but then I thought we'd have a raised decking area here, so it actually overhangs the waterfront, so guests can stand on the decking and gaze out over the waterfront to get a beautiful view of the mainland, see the island, I should say, looking at that intimate megalite as well as all the other features of the central island. I thought, soaking up such a view might end up leaving one feeling rather peckish. So we may as well capitalize on that and build a restaurant here. Not like a restaurant, not a restaurant you can sit in, just like a food stall, really. So that's what we're going to be doing in this episode, building a restaurant decking outdoor overlooking the water area is this episode. So as you can see, good start, deleted everything. This was actually quite challenging. I was trying to figure out a good way to build the plaza, because plazas are very difficult to build in Planet Coaster. Planet Coaster's path tool does not really lend itself to doing anything well, even things directly related to paths. It doesn't seem to manage very well. So it can be challenging at the best of times to get shapes that you want, but I ultimately was pretty satisfied with how this thing came out. I went with a fairly big building just because it's got two stalls, one for drink, one for food, as well as a little toilet block in the back. I know it is still pretty small to believably contain stuff like a kitchen and the infrastructure to store all the food. I guess you could just make the headcanon that it has a basement level, or we put a separate building a little bit further away that acts as like the storage, and then staff ferry things back and forth. Haven't really thought it too far through, to be honest, but I guess things like hot dog vans have similar amounts of kitchen space. And that's really the cuisine I want to try and emulate, is tacky hot dog vans you get at the side of the street. That's the kind of eating that I want to be seeing at my world-class theme park. I don't know about you guys. So it was just left with kind of what to do. So I'm placing some poles here because I thought about having the whole thing under canopy. I don't really know why, and I did abandon this idea very quickly, so I won't dwell on it too much. But here you can see me playing around with some of the art pieces to get a nice roof. But in the end, I thought it would probably look a little bit better and a bit more aesthetically pleasing if we just keep the whole thing open. So we did. Now, obviously, the path tool, like I said, does not lend itself very well to plazas. So we did end up with a lot of holes in the decking. We will fill these in ways such as this. So the way we're going to fill in this back part is by building a planter that goes all the way around, just conveniently filling in all those holes. And I think it came out pretty nice, all things considered. It looks like what I try and do when I'm covering up the holes is I don't want them to look like something that was only there to place up a hole in the path. I want it to look like it was always my intention to have the structure there. So in this case, I think the planter actually looks quite nice, and I almost forget that it's only actually here to cover up the hole in the decking. So I hope you agree that it looks, I hope you also think it looks pretty nice. And then as for the other holes, well, dear viewer, we'll get to those as we get to them, and you too can see what happens when it happens. And it's happening now. So I decided basically we'll have some trees planted, so it gives the whole thing a nice sort of natural look to it, but it's not safe, I would say, because people can just fall into those holes. So I just put some roping here just to kind of cover up the gaps, I guess. So not totally realistic because, the gap to tree ratio isn't particularly good, but because there's all ropes here, it's not the end of the world if someone did fall onto it, I should say. So that's how I've solved the issue of having the holes there. So that's the basic structure and layout of everything done. Just need to put a roof on this thing, as well as, place some seating for guests to, unsurprisingly, sit at. And then that's the episode done. So on screen in a second. Yeah, I don't know. I feel like I can't really just talk about the actual building itself because it's so simplistic that it really does not really much worth talking about. I guess I could mention those wooden slats on the side, the big wooden protrusions. They don't look particularly good. If it were an ideal world, I wouldn't have them, but they're there on this side to cover up, again, the fact that the paths don't actually fully come flush with the side of the building. So I just covered up the gaps and the curbing with those wooden pieces sticking out. So it looks like it's just a quirky architectural style, and they're like, I don't know, places where a kiosk could go potentially. I haven't really thought it through too much, but I think it looks nice. Like it could have much like the planter. I think it could look convincing enough that they're not there to serve a purpose of covering up a gap, rather than like they were there from an artistic standpoint. And there we go. It's a barbecue rib shop, so I thought, what better thing to have on the top of the barbecue rib shop than have a barbecue rib sign? Makes sense, right? I did think about having a pizza sign, but then I remembered that, actually that might be confusing to people, so we should probably stick with our roots and have barbecue rib there. And I expanded the actual size of the decking a bit because I thought, we were getting a little bit cozy. If it's a popular day, then the space that we have might only be enough to accommodate the queue. So we'll extend it out, make it a nice flat surface to really get to the water's edge. Then I'm using these big, thick wooden beams from the Spooky Pack to kind of create a structure, because the path, default supports don't look particularly great, at least not for this particular purpose. I guess they look fine for kind of most purposes, like they do look like realistic path supports, but they're not the most kind of creative looking. I think this looks a bit better for this particular use. And then we're going to go with some modern wooden fencing. It's the same fencing actually, and in fact the same support system as the cafe that we built all the way back in episode 1, which was the cafe that also overhung a body of water actually, but it overhung the river that connected the car park land. The car park's not been built, but it's where the car park is, like where the entrance building is, connected the bridge that connects the land that the entrance building sits on to the central island, which has all the main attractions that you see when you first get to the park. I don't know, I was going to say the main attractions, but I guess there isn't really a main attraction here. Like the biggest roller coaster is yet to be built. And in fact, I think that might even be next episode, come to think of it. I'm trying to think if there's anything that we build before then, but you know what? I don't think so. I think next episode we build potentially the best ride in the park. Like it's easy. I feel like if I were to rank the rides in this park in terms of how much I like them, it would be very difficult. The Internet Light is cool and all, but I don't know if it's just I'm a bit bored of it at this point because it's also the oldest, so I'm the most kind of acclimatized to it. I don't know, but in terms of ranking the coasters, there's 2 that stand out. It's the one we build next episode, and then one a little bit further down the line that I'm also very proud of. And it's probably that one from a technological standpoint is probably the best roller coaster I've ever built, and honestly ever will build, because it was so tedious to make because it's entirely done with the 4-meter smoothing technique. But at the same time, from a riding standpoint, I'm also very proud of the one we do next episode, even though it doesn't actually use 4-meter smoothing for its entire layout. It does use 4-meter smoothing for a lot of its layout, but not all of the layout, which is what the other one does. So you have a lot of things to look forward to, guys. Right now, we are doing fairly kind of meandering things, for want of a better term. I know it's not the most enthralling topic, hence why I've spent most of this episode talking about other things that we're going to be doing later on in this series. But I hope it was kind of fun, nonetheless, to see me build a building in this game about building buildings. Got to wrap it off, of course. We haven't done any curbing just yet, and I know you guys are getting a little bit worried about, the lack of curbing. Frightened, maybe. Some of you may have vomited out of pure confusion about where the curbing is of this episode. I want you to put all of that confusion, scare aside. We're doing it here, guys. I'm adding a little curb to the pathway that runs along the small beach of the central island. I am not putting a fencing here just because it gives people the opportunity to wander up to the water's edge, have a little picnic, have a little paddle, soak in the sights. Soaking the side, is that a pun? Because it's the water? I don't know. Let's move on. I will put some life rings up before I open the park, just in case, little Johnny wanders into the water. As you can see, the water's fairly rough. The water type is the rough water preset, just because I thought it looked better than the stock smooth water. I guess from a realistic standpoint, I should probably change it to smooth water, but whatever. Nah, actually, it's fine. I'm just going to call it it's fine. And there we are. That's it. So it still looks a little bit plain. Doesn't look too realistic, and that's usually, if things look still a little bit unrealistic, even if you spent a long time doing the scenery, oftentimes it's just because you need more greenery around it, because most things in life are not just built on plain empty grass. There's usually a little bit more nature at play, so you can make things look a little bit more realistic by adding lots of shrubbery and general nature and greenery, and then using the same steps that we used for our Street Fox coffee shop, and of course the plane ride as well. And then, I don't know if there's anything else. How much? We haven't got much time. I'm just zooming out on the Vegas timeline to see how much time we had left of this commentary, and you'll be pleased to hear it's not very much. So, like I say, I hope you enjoyed this episode. I feel like it's probably still a little bit too early to wrap things up. We've still got about a minute of talking left, but we are still placing greenery and fencing. Things I've already talked about ad nauseum in this episode, and indeed in previous episodes. But, you got to talk about something, and I feel like it's not really enough time to start an entirely new topic. I guess we could mention here, I was saying about curbing. We've also got the curbing with the classic fence as well, that classic green fence, just to kind of keep this thing, I guess, as a last hurrah, because honestly, I don't think we're going to be doing much more fencing with the little green fence, because we're moving away from the central island for a bit. We will be coming back to it, do not worry, and the green fence will be making a spectacular return. But for right now, I think we're going to be moving on to the big part of the park with all the giant rides. It's going to be fun. It's going to be exciting. There's going to be ups and downs, much like a real roller coaster. Guys, on screen, there are some links to things like the full playlist on the left. As well as that, in the description, there is a link to Twitter, Patreon, Discord, Instagram, and to my merchandise. I do hope you enjoyed this video, and hopefully look forward to the next episode. I hope you enjoy the rest of your Wednesday, my dudes. And goodbye.